Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 345. I'm recording this intro on April 17th, 2025, and you're going to hear this episode on April 28th or anytime thereafter. This is an interview episode, and in a moment, I am going to share with you the guest that I have on the show. The first thing I wanted to let you know, the one and only thing I wanted to just bring your attention to, is this week, so whenever you're listening to it, it could be many weeks ahead, but this week I launched a brand new program that I've been dying to offer, which is a consolidated program that's designed to get you fast results when it comes to learning anatomy. Not 300 hours, not 500 hours, not even the 90 days that I offer as part of my one-on-one Yoga Anatomy Blueprint program. No, this is something that I wanted to create that is short and really easy to consume so that you can boost your confidence as a yoga teacher. It's called the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator, and it went live this week, and it is the fastest way to boost your confidence and learn the fundamentals of anatomy. So I want to keep this intro short, but I did want to throw this in before we hop over to the interview or to my conversation with today's guest. So let me just say, to get more information about this brand new program, you can DM me the word accelerator on Instagram, or you can just look at my Instagram page because the link in my bio has the new program listed. And you can also go to my website, barebonesyoga.com. This program is under $400. It's $397. So it's so easy to say yes to, and it's going to get you amazing results. As of this week, I just began taking enrollments. So hop on there, take a look, see if the program is a good fit for you. Okay, so having said that, let me introduce you to today's guest. Today, I am having a conversation with Laurie James. And truth be told, I was actually on Laurie's podcast, which is called Confessions of a Freebird, last week. And our conversation will go live sometime, I believe, in late April or May. And I was so intrigued when I spoke with her. I wanted to have her on my show so that she could be in the seat of the person answering the questions. And especially because a lot of what we were talking about is really helpful for yoga teachers to hear, as well as just anyone with a heart and soul, anyone that wants to live in a joyful way, anyone that wants to live in a way where they are grounded and feeling like they're living their life on their terms. So let me just tell you a little bit about Laurie, and then we'll hop over to the conversation and you can hear directly from her. Laurie James is a coach, author, and host of the Confessions of a Freebird podcast, where she explores themes of midlife transitions, divorce, healing, and dating differently. With a focus on somatic experiencing and well being, Laurie offers guidance to those navigating empty nest syndrome, personal transformation, and the journey to rediscovering oneself. Her work empowers individuals to embrace change and approach life's challenges with a sense of freedom and self compassion. Through her podcast, she provides valuable insights and practical tools for living a fulfilled and authentic life at any age. Laurie also talks in our conversation today about her book, and you can hear more about that when we talk, and you can get her book where books are sold, and you'll find out more about that as we get into the conversation. One last thing, we talk quite a bit about somatics, and this has relevancy not only to us as people, but also especially for yoga teachers, because part of what we do is help people tap into their somatic experience of their body. So I wanted to just throw that out there to really personalize this to you. If you are listening as a yoga teacher, we get into specific techniques and the application of somatics to yoga teaching. So with that, let's go on to my conversation with Laurie James. Hi there.
Hello. How are you, Karen?
How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Very good. Well, I am excited to go over a whole bunch of stuff with you. I've been doing some prepping and getting
Awesome.
for, a conversation here. So yeah, so if you're ready, we can just dive right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So, I think a good place to start is I'll leave the kind of the door open for you to share what you want to share, just
Sure,
to
of
let the listener know a little bit about you and
course.
what you do.
Yes. Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you for having me on as a guest. I'm excited to share this information with you and your listeners. So, I'm Laurie James. I am a mother. I am a recovering caregiver. I'm a divorcee, and I am a longtime yogi.
Mm.
I started doing yoga probably about 15 years ago. I am not, let me make it clear, I am not an instructor, but I found yoga on the early side of me going through this very difficult time in my life that I wrote about in my book, Sandwiched, about a time in my life when I was raising my four daughters. My mother fell ill and needed care, and then my marriage began to fall apart. And I have to say that yoga is one of the things that really saved me. And I also say that yoga is one of the first introductions I had to nervous system regulation. And as a somatic experiencing practitioner and a life coach, so soma means the body in Greek, and somatic experiencing is really about understanding. It's two things, in my opinion. Maybe not everybody that is trained in this believes this, but I do. It's two things. One, it's learning how to regulate our nervous system, and yoga is a great way to do that. But two, there's also a deeper component to it that can also help to heal trauma.
Mhm.
And, the majority of us have had some type of trauma in our lives, whether it's a car accident or our needs weren't met as children. And as we know, those things show up later on in our lives, right? If
Sure.
we don't really develop the awareness, work through them, heal them. And I know a lot of people turn to yoga for one of those healing modalities.
Mm.
And I know I did. And at one point, I probably will do a yoga class probably twice a week now. But at one point, I was doing it probably 3 and 4 times a week because it was really the only thing that helped to make me, and I didn't have the language for it then. I just knew it made me feel better. It made me feel more focused, more grounded.
Mhm.
And I didn't always like the poses. I didn't like, I wasn't flexible. I'm still not super flexible, unlike, some of the instructors, but I can do a lot of I'd say I'm a level 2. I'm definitely not a level 3 yogi. So, and so what happened with me, you know, as I left a marriage that I write, it was at the end of my book. I know I just spoil alert. As I left my marriage, I continued to do yoga, but I fell very ill after. And what happened was I ended up in the hospital, and it really felt like my nervous system, I felt like I stuck my finger in a light socket, and I felt like my nervous system was fried. So it took me 6 months to recover. I made a full recovery, but I contribute so much of then the next level, a deeper healing to the somatic experiencing work that I did with a practitioner that I found. He was a therapist, and actually a friend referred me. And he was the one that encouraged me to take it, one, to continue to deepen my healing, but also then to use it as another tool in my toolbox as I coach women. And as you were on my podcast, as you know, I coach women who are in midlife healing from trauma, divorce, healing, and, if they do get into dating and
Mhm.
doing it differently.
Mhm.
And so much of it is in order for us to do things differently, we really need to develop a better relationship with our nervous system and with what we are experiencing on the inside.
Mhm. Mhm. So thanks for sharing that. That kind of gives me a bunch of different directions for questions. I'm curious, and you mentioned your book, so maybe this touches on themes from the book. A little bit about, if you'd be willing to share a little bit about what you were going through that maybe ended up in the book, just kind of sharing a little bit
Sure.
about that, not really the process, but what were you experiencing? What revelations were you having that the marriage you were in wasn't working? You're a mom of 4 daughters. How did you come?
Yeah.
I'm divorced, so I know how I came to that decision. What
Yeah.
was it like for you?
Um, it didn't come lightly,
Mm,
first of all, because when you develop, you've got 4 kids, same husband, you build this life together. As you know, we never come to those decisions lightly, unless your nervous system goes into a flight response and then you just bail, right?
mm,
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's your nervous system saying, what I'm experiencing doesn't feel safe, and so I
mm,
need to leave. And
mhm,
we all need to honor what we are experiencing at
mhm,
any given time.
mhm,
The more we understand our nervous system and build that relationship with our nervous system, we can then sometimes look at it and say, okay, am I not safe in what I'm experiencing right now? Or is this my nervous system just maybe overreacting a little bit because it wasn't safe in my childhood? So to go back now to answer your question, because I know I got off track here, is I was in a relationship and I didn't have any needs for the majority of my marriage. I took care of everybody. My ex-husband, he was loyal, and he was very good at his job. And what I thought was happening was we were dividing and conquering. And he was working, I was raising the kids, and I thought that we had mutual respect for that. And there was some financial betrayal that led me to then wake up, that was my awakening, and realize he does not respect me. He doesn't really respect women in general. And again, that took me 5.5 years of talk therapy to work through. It really wasn't until I did the somatic work that I really felt that shift and that change in my body. And we talk, I know in yoga, we talk about embodiment. And so, um, and what else happened and what led me to falling very ill is the stress. Your body, that was my body giving out. This is what I make up in my head, is because the doctors could not figure out what was wrong with me. They ran every test and they basically diagnosed me with an unnamed virus with migrating arthritis. And I had these like hot spots that were, popping up all over my body. That was energy trying to release from my body that had been stored. I did not have a great childhood. I mean, there were aspects of it were great, but there was definitely some childhood trauma. I struggled, or there was abuse in my childhood. So, and I hadn't really dealt with that. I was in this unhealthy marriage for many years. I was caring for my elderly parents. I was raising 4 teenagers.
So,
So that's a lot, right?
yeah.
And eventually your body is going to give out
Mm, mm,
because when you stay in, so when we're talking about the nervous system, we have a parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest. So that's what you feel after you go to like a yin yoga class, or even maybe even a vinyasa flow yoga class. It's like you're feeling really great and you're grounded and you're in this place where you have activation, but then you're feeling very calm and centered, right? But our society, and I think this is why people turn to yoga, we live in this very fast-paced environment, this fast-paced world where go, go, do, work 10 hours, 12 hours a day, and then we experience burnout. And then people find yoga and they're like, oh,
mhm.
right? They're just, this is heaven. Um, but then there's the sympathetic state, which is what we call activation, fight, flight, freeze. But when we stay in that sympathetic state for too long, then we can move up into a dorsal vagal place, which is disassociation, shutdown, numbness, all of those things. And when we stay in the sympathetic state or a dorsal vagal shutdown for too long, then that's when we develop um, hyper vigilance, anxiety, not inability to sleep. And then eventually it turns into what happened to me, or it can turn into autoimmune issues. 80% of autoimmune um, issues happen to women,
Mm.
not
Yeah,
men.
even the rash you had could probably be linked to an autoimmune response on some level.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they diagnosed it as migrating arthritis,
Mm.
and it was very painful. I left the hospital. I mean, I'm very active. I exercise regularly. I eat well. I don't take any I take supplements and some vitamins. I left the hospital with a walker that I could not walk. And I looked like I was 6 months pregnant because I was retaining all of this water weight. I lost 14 pounds. I mean, it was not pretty.
Yeah.
And so, if anybody's listening and they have found yoga, congratulations. This is a really wonderful step to helping you connect with your body, become more embodied, and and develop that better relationship with what you're experiencing inside. I think and the next step is, you know, there is a next step, and that's, understanding the nervous system regulation a little bit more.
Yeah, as you were talking, something popped into my head that I mean, I don't know if you've ever considered this, but it's interesting when you talked about the dynamic between you and your husband and his perception with respect to you and women in general, and yet you have four daughters.
Oh, yes, trust me, that thought has entered my mind millions of times. And, from a spiritual standpoint, when you think about the world presents you with, what you need to work through or learn, right? That is his lesson. How do I learn to, because his father didn't respect women either and didn't respect his mom, which, and I, of course, I thought he was different and blah, blah, blah. And, silly
Yeah.
me. But then I was also, I thought I was marrying somebody different than my father. And emotionally, I married somebody very much the same. So yes, trust me. And my girls are, they will push back
Yeah.
towards
Yeah.
him and they stand up to him, but it's affected them as well.
Sure, sure. I mean, how can it not, even without that layer of the dynamic, just at its face, it will affect them, I'm
Yeah.
sure. So how did you get into this line of work? Was this something you were doing before you personally went through these big changes in your life?
So thank you. Great question. So I have four daughters. My youngest are a set of identical twins. And so when they were in high school, I was looking for something that I could do. I've always been in my previous life, because I stayed home to raise my four kids. In my previous life, I was a recruiter. I was always very personable and I liked that interaction with people. I liked working with people. And so I was playing around with coaching. Well, actually, not at that time. I was exploring what I wanted to do. Do I want to get involved in a nonprofit? I wanted to give back in some way. And so I was in that exploration stage. Um, and so that's when I started writing my book.
Okay.
That took me 5 years to write. So first I wrote the book, and as I was writing my book, because I didn't know how to write outside of like a PTA email, so I started taking classes and, how do you write memoir? And then eventually found, as I was getting closer to the end, found a really great coach that I worked one-on-one with. And so when I, so, and this is an interesting point that I'll make about my book, is I wrote the first draft and I was still married at the time. And I said, because I had enough intuition, I've always been pretty connected to my intuition. I said, this is not the ending of my book. Like I just knew it. I felt it. I said, this is not the ending of my book. This does not feel right.
Mm.
And I would say within a couple of months, I finally was able to leave the marriage. There was a lot of other factors involved there. I needed to make sure that my mom was good because there were many times she was on hospice. My twins had health issues in high school, so I wanted to make sure that they were good. But I finally, all my moving parts were in place and they were good. And so then I felt like and I'd done enough work on myself that I was able to have the strength to leave my marriage. Um, and so once I left my marriage, that's when I was finally able to write the ending of my book.
Wow, that's amazing. I definitely want to ask you about your book. There's one thing though that's come up in my
Sure.
mind as we're just speaking, and this is a theme that I hear oftentimes from women who want to enroll in my yoga teacher training program. And what they'll say to me is sort of similar to some of the themes you've brought up, where they're taking care of kids who are close to being adult children, but
Mhm.
maybe still living in the home, or maybe even not. They've had a lifestyle, maybe they've been working, maybe they have changed their work status, but they identify very much as a caregiver. And I can
Yeah.
tell when I speak with them, they're battling these two parts of themselves. The part of themselves they want to feed, to be the kind of yoga teacher they want to be. Maybe they're teaching one class a week and they'd really like
Yeah.
to teach more. Maybe they're teaching a couple classes, but they're really struggling. But they feel like if they invest in my program, like I had a woman one time flat out say to me, that's money I should be spending on my kids. And these are little
Mm.
kids. Most of the women I work with have kids that are a little bit older, certainly not preschool age or anything like that.
Right. Like middle school, high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what comes up for you when you hear that sort of thing? Maybe you could in the past relate to that, or maybe you work with women who sort of have this inner struggle between wanting to invest in themselves in any way at all and
Yes.
having this life history of being a caregiver.
Yes. Yes. And that was such a struggle and such a battle for me because I took care of my elderly parents. I didn't, not on a day-to-day basis, but I oversaw their care. I managed their finances. Um, I hired caregivers, fired caregivers, and there's all kinds of crazy ass caregiver stories if anybody wants a good story in my book. But um, so so I get that. I get that pull of you have this sense of responsibility for your family, for your either parents, or even if you have a child who has special needs or is neurodivergent or whatever it is, and then you have this pull for your desire. And then you feel guilty for investing in yourself because that money really should be going to your children.
Or even time, even
Or
people.
time, yes, all of it, time, money, all of it. And this is what I want to say is we are the best investment we can make. Because if we are showing our children that we are worthy of investing in ourselves and bettering ourselves and following what our passion, what that pull, that yearning that we have within,
Mm,
then what better example
mm,
are we for our children? Because even though you don't think your children are watching and
mm,
paying attention, they are very much paying attention to everything that we do
mm,
and those actions. And I get the guilt.
mm,
I mean, I would often feel so guilty
mm.
about doing something when I feel like I should be doing something else. But I work with so many women who come to me who are just depleted.
Mm,
And that's what happened to me. I depleted myself, so depleted because then we were like, we're finally like, okay, uncle, okay, I'll do something for myself,
mhm.
right? Because we something in us either doesn't feel worthy or somebody has told us that we're not worthy or that, you know, we earn our worth through being that caregiver. And there is a certain sense of reward and pride, you know, of being that matriarch,
Right.
but at what cost?
Yeah, it even reminds me of sometimes when I work with a teacher, they will have a lot of worries about students in their classes. If there's a student who appears to be having a tough time doing the sequence, maybe an older student mixed in with a bunch of younger students, maybe a raw beginner, they'll share with me, I'm really worried about that person. I'm worried they're going to get hurt. And there's this, when you said matronly, motherly, like it's
Yeah.
almost, it's not sort of in a helicopter mom way. It comes from a compassionate place, but it can be really debilitating for the teacher not
Yeah.
being able to have that healthy separation that gives the student agency over their experience. And in fact, the teacher doesn't know for sure that that person is feeling like they're struggling. They could objectively know they're new compared to other people, and at the same time could feel great that they're in the class and finally getting yoga into their life. So I
Yeah.
often do that, and the person will say, "Oh my God, I never even thought of that. And when they can release themselves from that sort of energetic cord that's connecting them to how
Mm-hmm.
students are doing and the stories they're telling themselves in their head
Mm-hmm.
based on
Mm-hmm.
just what they see, not what
Mm-hmm.
anybody, not what the person is saying. So I'm curious how, I mean, this kind of thing can show up with children, it can show up with your partner. How does, I mean, even your story, you had to exhibit a really strong sense of self-preservation, self-love, and will to leave this relationship. So where does somebody tap into that if historically they have not lived in that way?
Yeah. First, I want to say if somebody is experiencing that, there's nothing wrong with you,
Mm,
right? Because when we start to bring more awareness to some of these things that maybe have been habitual or that our society or our family or our culture has ingrained in us, there's
yeah.
a sense of shame that comes with it.
Mm,
So, and we don't know what we don't know until we do.
mm, mm,
So first, I want to just say there's nothing wrong with you and you're not bad. But if there's something inside of you that is say, I think we all have the best of intentions, whether you're a yoga instructor or you're a coach helping women or, whatever our role, we're just being a mother.
mm,
So I think it is understanding, first of all, reflecting inward and saying, why am I so worried about that individual in my class?
mm, mhm,
Right. And is it, well, and then I would say, from a somatic place, what are you noticing in your body?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, there's a lot that will come up when I'll ask questions like that. There's a lot of nervousness. I mean, of course, we're talking about a very specific context, but
Right.
come up
This
differently.
can relate to so
Oh,
many different scenarios. And what I want to encourage is just notice what you're noticing in your body.
mm,
Is there a sadness? Is there a restriction? Without less emotion about it, but what are the sensations? And I have you'll be in the show notes, but I have a beginner's guide to somatic healing, and on it there's a page that has circles with all the different bodily sensations. And this helps to bring language to what we're feeling. Do I feel a tightness? In yoga, you talk about feeling open, especially if you do any heart openers, right? You feel very open, but maybe when you start. So I would just say to the yoga teacher that's listening is, what are you noticing in your body right now?
mm,
As you're having this empathy for this individual, and then just notice that. Notice if any images, any thoughts come up with it,
mhm,
and really like question, like, is it my responsibility?
mhm,
Like, yes, you can always invite um would you like adjustments? I mean, I love it when yoga instructors come in and ask me, raise your hand if you don't want an adjustment, because some people don't, or maybe they're, whatever. I remember when I was getting back into yoga after I was sick for like 4 months, I wouldn't raise my hand because I knew I needed to just move very slowly to get my practice back.
mhm, mhm,
Right. So, or maybe even suggest talking to that individual after class and just, maybe get a better idea of what their situation. Do you want help? Do you not want help? And maybe just have a little dialogue. And that will also help to change your perspective or give you information as a yoga instructor of what their situation is, because we so often make stuff up in our head
totally.
by
Yeah.
what we see. And And we don't know what everybody's story is underneath that.
Right. No, absolutely. That leads me to a question you had mentioned. We've talked about it. You've touched on it a couple of times, this idea of somatics, and you started out
Yeah.
by sharing soma refers to the body. Um, let's just talk a little bit more about what that's all about. I mean, you talked about this link that we'll include in the show notes to list out sensations. Of
Yeah.
course, you teachers refer to a lot of sensations when they're teaching. Let's talk about it in the context of just a human being living with a body, with
Yeah.
a life story in their body. What kinds of sensations maybe should alert us? What kinds of sensations can we sort of just experience? How can we be good stewards of these messages that our body is always sending? Because you hear stories sometimes similar to what you were describing, where the person will have a breakdown, and in retrospect, they'll say, my body was giving me signals all
Yeah.
along. So
Yeah. Well,
help.
I think the better relationship we can develop with our bodies and the messages they're giving us, because they're always giving us messages, right? And like you said, the Oprah says it so well, where she says, first the message is going to like tap you on the shoulder, right? And then it's going to pat you on the shoulder, and then it might push you a little bit, and then eventually it's going to knock you down.
Mhm.
So the more that we can listen to what we're experiencing in our body. So, and that goes for good and bad. And so often we only listen to that tightness in our chest, the restriction, the beating heart, because that is our body moving up into a sympathetic state of fight, flight, or freeze.
Mhm.
And that is our autonomic nervous system, because it's all our autonomic nervous system is always scanning for, is this danger? Is this life threatening, or am I safe?
Mhm.
Millions of times
Mhm.
throughout the course of the day.
Mhm.
So it's always scanning for those three things. But we override those things. Yoga instructors override those things, human beings, because we have not been taught. All of this stuff should be taught in school, honestly, right? So much of, the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, it needs to be taught in school. So we don't learn this unless you're listening to a podcast like this. And so the more that we can continue to get in tune with our body and our intuition, but you can't get in touch with your intuition unless you have a regulated nervous system. And again, a regulated nervous system from a somatic state, or from a somatic experiencing practitioner state, because there's a lot of people using this word soma and somatic. It's not about always being calm. It's about learning to come up into activation. Maybe you're in a yoga class and you're holding a really hard pose. That is activation. But then coming down and coming down, and maybe you come into child pose after that. And can you really allow your body to rest and relax?
Mhm.
That yin and yang of the yoga, but can you do that in life? Can you really learn to activate? Come up throughout wake up in the morning, you activate, you walk your dog, you have your coffee, do your workout, and then you're working whatever it is you're doing, and then you have lunch, and maybe you're a little tired, so you take a little relaxation, or do you just drink more coffee and go, go, go?
Mhm.
And push through, right?
Mhm.
So a regulated nervous system is coming up into activation, but also being able to come down into the parasympathetic and to arrest and digest. And that's the beautiful match between yoga and somatics, is that's what you guys are teaching, right? Basically, is to come up and down and come up and down and then rest in Shavasana. But what I would say is, again, tapping into the sensations that you're feeling as you're doing throughout the day. When I work with a client, I often have them at the beginning keep track 2 to 3 times a day to just check in with their bodies and write down 2 or 3 words that are associated less about emotions, but if there's a strong emotion, write that, but more about the sensation. So that's, I'm noticing tingling in my hands right now. I always get a little nervous before I get on a call. I'm doing a podcast. So I notice, my armpits might have a little moisture underneath them. But one of the things that I'll do before is I will just sit here for a minute or two and I'll just feel the chair underneath me.
Mm,
I'll feel my feet on the ground.
mhm, mhm,
And immediately I can feel, because I've done this work for long enough, I can feel my energy just dropping down just by doing that.
mm,
And I feel more grounded. That
mhm,
is such a simple, like, when somebody's starting their class and you're just sitting there, just getting grounded, go into the sensations, go into what you're feeling inside, because we associate that with something bad or something scary, or we're
mm,
just not taught to do it.
mhm. Yeah,
Does that,
I asked
I
that
hope
question.
that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it gives me another kind of part too, because I ask oftentimes when I work with yoga teachers in my program, how did you feel after you taught that class? And they'll pause and they'll say, you know what? No one's ever actually asked me how I
Yeah.
feel. They're usually, the whole yoga industry is run on this feedback model that harkens back to the days of the guru, when you would sit in front of the guru and he typically would say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And quite frankly, the industry continues with this format where newer yoga teachers are mentored by a senior teacher and everything's very feedback driven. And the piece that's always misunderstood, in my opinion, is that anybody experiencing another teacher's class is experiencing that through their own lens of
Yeah.
life and experience.
Yeah.
And so, yes, while you can give some, feedback here or there around skills and presentation, the bulk of what you're experiencing is really just germane to you. And so I
Yeah.
often counsel yoga teachers, especially if the feedback is negative, don't take it to heart, because that's just that person's opinion. And it becomes oftentimes, especially if they're auditioning for a job, a source of a self-worth attack, that the person will now feel like, well, I'm not good enough. And
Yeah.
we'll have that conversation. And when I ask them, well, how did you feel? It starts to bring up some of what you're discussing. And I do actually give them a grounding exercise they can do to down regulate the nervous system in the midst of a class. I'm curious though, so much of what I hear, and I find this really fascinating, is how teachers will go in to teach a class and it sometimes triggers a particular memory that connects to a specific feeling that's uncomfortable. And
Yep.
teachers will, I just had one yesterday say to me, I don't know what to do with my arms. They're looking at me and I feel awkward in my own body. Like, this is a teacher who's trying to break the habit of practicing with her class all the time. And she wants to do more of the walk and talk so she can see them and maybe assist them. And this transition from doing your practice and
Hmm.
speaking to what you feel as the cues that you share, and then moving to a model where you're walking around and now you're not doing yoga and you have to think about what to say, and you also now don't know what to do with your arms and legs and people are looking at you. Teachers will often say to me, I don't know where I'm supposed to be looking. Am I supposed to look at the students in their eyes? Am I supposed to just sort of look around? Like, it just brings up and
Well, yeah,
memory,
keep
like
going.
memories of when I was a young kid and I was a new kid in school. Like, that piece is always fascinating to me, how this one act of walking in a room to teach yoga can bring up these memories that triggers the negative sensation that causes the problem. So
Yes.
what
And
comes
from a
up?
nervous system standpoint, I totally get it. And from a nervous system standpoint, our nervous system does not know past from present. Right. So there's that. So if we ever had an experience where we had to get up in the front of class when we were a child and make a presentation that we weren't prepared for, where we were nervous and then the kids laughed, or we had a performance at school and we messed up and then we were shamed for it, that's that trigger showing up in the present moment. Never mind public speaking, which is no different than being a yoga instructor on so many levels, is the scariest thing people can do.
Mm.
Right. So from those two aspects, but so what I would say to that person who is struggling with that, the more that they can, notice I'm feeling awkward with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. See if you can come back to the body and just maybe at that moment, lean up against the wall, put your hands behind your back and just look around the room and see if you can ground in that moment. Feel your feet on the
Mm.
ground
Mhm. Mhm.
and bring yourself back into your body. And if there are sensations of restriction or, heightened heart rate, see if even in that moment, even if it's just for a minute while you're talking, to see if you can pay attention to that.
Mhm.
Right. Because we want to move toward what we're experiencing and feeling, not away from it. But we've been taught as society to move away from it because, we're not supposed to feel these things and our emotions are too big
Mhm.
and we're bad for, go to your room and stop crying about that, or I'll give you something to cry about, or whatever your parents said or your teachers. You know, and we need to be okay with what we're feeling. We're human beings and we're going to feel the range of emotions. We're going to feel awkward in a class that's new. And what I would also say is we want to do things, we want to make changes in small, tolerable steps. If you make changes too quick, it's going to overwhelm your nervous system.
Mhm.
And then you're going to feel like a failure and you're going to shut down and you're going to go back to your old ways. So do it slowly. So let's take this example of this yoga instructor who's trying to make this transition. Maybe she walks around for a quarter of the room to start,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And then she practices, and then maybe she does it a third and then move up to a half.
Mhm.
But, and so those are the two things that I would say is embody yourself, really feel your body, feel your feet on the ground, feel your body leaning up against the wall, supporting you, or if you're just sitting on your yoga mat, feel that. But then also be kind to yourself and don't expect it to happen right away. Your nervous system, anything new, your nervous system is going to equate as um as scary and dangerous. So we need to let our nervous system know that what we're doing is safe. And the way to do that is through evidence of doing it in small doses
Right.
and then communicating, oh, that wasn't that scary. That wasn't that hard. I mean, how many times have all of us gone into a party or whatever, a social setting, or if you're a yoga instructor and you had all this anxiety about teaching the class or going to that social event, and then you come out and you're like, wow, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Right?
Yeah.
It's like that's our nervous system preparing danger, danger, danger. And then we realize, okay, but the more we can do that in small, tolerable steps, it's teaching and rewiring our nervous system that this is not dangerous. And I shouldn't be embarrassed about not knowing what to do with my hands or whatever it is.
Yeah, I talk about it as just little experiments. I'll say to them, just consider yourself like a scientist. You're just going in to experiment with, let's say, walking around. And along with the somatic shift that you talked about, when they get to the end of the class and they feel their body and they say, wow, that wasn't so bad. Oftentimes, what will happen is over time with these little experiments, it'll extinguish the belief they had that they couldn't do it. I couldn't be
Yeah.
the kind of teacher who walks around.
Right. But what that's really doing, Karen, is that is signaling to your nervous system, right, by
Mhm.
doing these small little experiments that it is safe, that it is not unsafe to do these things,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And you're exactly right. Do it small little experiments,
Right.
and that's rewiring their brain
Right.
and then rewiring their nervous system. This isn't dangerous. This is safe. I'm going to be safe. Right.
Right.
And we don't want to override that nervous system because that's what's kept us alive. And we want to have those signals if there is danger, right? If
Right.
there is an earthquake or if there is a car
Right.
accident or somebody's attacking us. So we don't
Right.
want to override it, but we also need to understand like when it really is dangerous and when it's not and develop and continue to develop that relationship with our nervous system.
Mhm. The other thing that popped into my head when you were speaking before and you mentioned intuition is I'd love to dive a little bit into that. I actually
Yeah.
had maybe what you would consider an intuitive thought the other day, actually probably like 2 weeks ago, where I was thinking about just sort of, I had listened to a podcast of a friend of mine who's a very well established yoga teacher, and she has a very specific way that she teaches and a very specific offer that she offers. And I listened to the podcast that she was on, and I had this sort of intuitive hit about
Mhm.
something she was saying that spurned on a thought about something I could create that was different, yet features of it were sort of the same. And so over the past 2 weeks, I created a brand new offer, in part inspired by what I had heard her talking about, and also some feedback I'd been getting from yoga teachers that they were looking for something really short and focused because a lot of the teachers I talk to want to enroll in my program, but they don't feel like they have 3 months to devote
Yeah.
to their training. So I'm curious because when this was all happening before I built the program, which I did over the past week, I was thinking, it's not that I think I'm the kind of person who doesn't often listen to my intuition, but I'm such a planful, pragmatic person that it was a weird thing for me to have that experience listening to my friend on that other podcast and start to honor that with actual 3D actions. And I was sort of doing it in deference to that intuitive hit, like, and also fueled by some actual conversations I'd had. But it wasn't like I did extensive market research. It wasn't like I had extensively pulled my email list to say, hey, would people be interested in this sort of thing?
Yeah.
I was really feeling this intuitive drive to try this kind of offer. So what what does that mean? When how can we sort of distinguish, especially if you're someone like me who associates as a pretty type A, pretty pragmatic, practical person? How do you know when it's okay to follow your intuition?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I want to say around intuition is when you get a hit, and I get hits all the time, right? Like, but there's only so much time in the day to do what we want to do. And so I'm first of all, I'm impressed that you got a hit and then you created something in a week
oh,
because
it was like,
I
yeah,
can't do that. But
it was like once I agreed with my heart and soul, and
yeah,
obviously I did have a few actual conversations, I was like, I need to do this. And then I
yeah,
wrote my friend back because I had originally wrote her when she was on the show, and I shared with her a little about the epiphany I had. And then
yeah,
emailed her 2 days ago and said, okay, it's done. I built the program. And she was like, oh my God, I just talked to you a week ago. But I was really
yeah.
like a driven person.
Well, so that's information, from an intuition standpoint, that's information. And what I want to say about intuition and nervous system regulation is, let me ask you a question. what state would you say that your mind, body, and soul was in when you got that information, that
I
hit?
was I was really excited. I really was like,
No,
wow.
but what state was your body in? Like, were you like busy, 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 go, 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 do, 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 or were you
Oh,
like in a
I was doing my morning walk when I listened to podcasts. So I was
yeah,
in this like out in nature, very relaxed, doing my morning walk. And I know this person and I've listened to her on this other podcast before. And I wasn't really expecting when I pressed play, I was like, oh, this is her. Like I've heard her on his show before. This will be cool. I know this person, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't like I was really expecting to have an
right?
epiphany. And then when I was walking along and she was talking, I was like, oh my God, that sounds like something I want to try. That sounds like something that might resonate with my community.
From a somatic place, I would say you were in a regulated state. Your
Totally.
nervous system was regulated. You were going for your morning walk. You might, be experiencing some activation because you're walking, but, and you just woke up, so you haven't had a lot of busyness. And so that's when we want to listen to the little taps, to the little nudges that we're experiencing is when we're in a grounded, regulated state. And how do you know the difference? When you're triggered or when you're feeling a heightened sense of activity, if your heart is racing, if you're just finished getting out of an argument with somebody and you're like, fuck this shit. Pardon me.
Right.
I shouldn't have, like, that's not your intuition.
Right. Right.
That's
Right.
your nervous system saying, this is not safe. I need to get out, or I need to fight, or
Yeah.
I'm going to crawl under the sheets and hide. Right. So it's our intuition always comes in when we're in a grounded, centered, regulated state.
That's a
That's
really,
when we want to listen to the information. And then here's the other thing is the fact that you were able to mobilize
mm,
on what it was and create it without feeling resistance, without feeling that judgment, or is somebody going to buy this? Like, you intuitively knew on some level, just through this little bit of information, this is something that I need to create and offer.
right. And
And
it
you were
really
able
was,
to do it that fast. That is
yeah.
you tapping into your higher power and your intuition.
Yeah. I actually had the first person enroll this morning, so that was kind of cool to see that.
Congratulations.
I can see that come through. Yeah, so for me too, it's not so much do I have a lot of teachers enroll in this as the ideal outcome. It's having this exist and being able to offer this and see what happens. Like
Yeah.
if I didn't have this sort of middle of the road offer, I have a membership, I have a pretty significant high end offer. This is something that's under 400 bucks. And I've never
In the
had
middle.
something in this price point. And so for
Yeah.
me, I'm looking at it as an experiment. Is this something that is, it's time limited, much more time limited than my other program, and much less of an investment for somebody.
Yeah.
So for me, the ultimate result is just to have it, to experiment with it, because if I didn't have it, how am I going to know? So my intuition was sort of driving me to that as the outcome, not so much, oh, I'd love to have a number of teacher enroll. That would be just cherry on the cake.
Right. Right. But that's, we as creators, we have to try different things. We get feedback, but we have to try different things and kind of see what sticks,
Right,
whether, you're creating programs like you are, you're a yoga instructor, you're a coach like me, and it doesn't mean that we're a failure. It just
right,
means, okay, this isn't exactly, I either need to fine tune it or maybe I need to create something different.
right, right,
And
right,
so often and I do it too, we equate it to failure, and that's that interpersonal, that's the work. It's like, where is that failure coming from? Why, why is this showing up? And typically it relates to something that happened in the past.
right.
And when I talked about at the beginning, part of, I view somatic experiencing as two different things, nervous system regulation and then dealing with the trauma. That is showing up in the present. That past is showing up in the present because it's unresolved and there's still energy stuck in your nervous system,
Mhm.
which is why we need to get in touch with the sensations, because the sensations are the language in the nervous system. And when we can do that and we can allow the sensations to emerge, experience, express, and expel them, they will be less intense
Mm,
and they will be less frequent,
mm.
and we will be able to regulate our nervous system more more often
Right, right,
and
right, right.
stay regulated.
Um, so I have another question that is sort of germane to yoga teaching, but I think it brings up just some general topics. Um, I can go at this from two different directions. So occasionally when I post on social media, I have a lot of um, different, not really protocols, but templates and frameworks that I share with teachers around things like how to share anatomy in your cues, what are the different types of cues, how to create a sequence. And it brings some structure and format to things that oftentimes teachers get overwhelmed with. And sometimes I'll get yoga teachers will comment, I would never want to teach this way because I like to follow my intuition when I teach. And I look at that sort of comment and it sort of makes me chuckle, because if you're a brand new yoga teacher and you don't have a track record of teaching, and then someone says, "Oh, don't worry about any of that, just go in and sort of intuitively figure it out." Those are the teachers that come to me and they say, I don't think I'm ever going to be good enough to be a teacher, because when I see comments like that, I don't know how to tap into my intuition. So that's
Right.
part one. What comes up for you when you hear
So,
that?
well, so again, it's like we're learning something new. Whenever we're learning something new, it's always helpful to have an outline or a framework. I mean, some of the best yoga instructors, there used to be a studio, it's still there, but it's changed owners and a lot of the yoga instructors have left. Um, but it was like I didn't know what we had until it was gone. Let's just say that. And some of the best yoga instructors that have been teaching for years always had notes
Mhm.
about what they wanted to teach and
Mhm.
always had an outline.
Mhm.
And, you would see them looking at their little notebook and, not just like studying it, but they would go and it's like, whatever the sequence was that they were trying to create. I would do mostly vinyasa flow classes and then some yin, um, or restorative. But, so I think it's always best to be prepared, just as a creator and a teacher and a leader for myself.
Mhm.
So, and yes, there are moments when you have to, like, just for instance, this podcast interview, I always have answers to questions. I think that's always good. So you have a general guideline, and then, but it's also beautiful for like a yoga instructor to come in and say, how is everybody feeling today? What do you want to work on? Hips, heart opener, um, core, whatever it is. And then you can use that and weave that in.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like you have to connect with with the yogis or your audience or your clients to give them what they need, but have a general framework or outline.
Yeah, because
And
that comes up a lot.
because otherwise, like if you're just going to go with your intuition, I, I, um,
Yeah,
I
how
think
would
it's
you,
a combination. You got to have balance
right?
in all of this. You
Yeah.
can't just go off your intuition. Maybe if you've been teaching yoga for 15 years and you know a ton of different sequences and you can read the room well, but that takes practice. And again, goes back to the nervous system regulation. It's like that takes time to do that.
Right. So, sort of a related sort of teaching skill thing that really I'd love to get your thoughts on as a person who really works with energy and intuition and things that come up in people's bodies when they're just doing different things in their life. And I'm sure you know as a yoga student, I even when I think about the four types of yoga cues, I think of action, alignment, anatomy, and somatic. And the somatic cues are the cues that you could be using when you're speaking to the body, right? And that
Mhm.
might be different than when you're saying things like step your right foot forward, reach your arms up. Your somatic cues might be something like, what do you notice in your right hip as you're in this pose, right? So one of the things that occasionally comes up in a class, and I think has sort of been out there for a long time, is this idea that our students have emotions locked in different body parts, and that there is an opportunity in a yoga pose to sort of release that. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, I've done some reading on this, framed more from the perspective of anatomy and the nervous system, like literally at the level of like the motor neurons and the muscles, not so much nervous system as we're talking here, like about
Yeah.
regular.
Right.
I'm curious though, just because some of what I think about is the languaging that we use. Like as yoga teachers, if we're going into a class and maybe saying you should be feeling a big release in your hip, does that change the experience of the student who may or may not be feeling that? So I don't know, anything come up for you when you hear that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's always instead of telling somebody what they should be feeling, I think it's always best is, notice if you are feeling anything in your hip, right? Because everybody's different. Everybody's body's different. Everybody's nervous system is different. Some people might be tighter. Some people might be looser. Some people are holding more stress. So that's one thing that uh, comes up for me as you're sharing that. From a somatic place, if, as the fourth piece, I think anytime that you can help people get more in touch with their body is a good thing.
Mm,
So if you say, notice where in your body where, as you're holding this pose, where it's tight.
mm,
Notice if there's any place in your body that is less tight or that's softer,
mm, mm,
right? And then you pendulate, we call it pendulation, but can you move back and forth between what you're feeling as that's tight and what's not as tight in your body?
mm,
Oftentimes that will help to release what's tighter in your body
mhm,
because you're signaling to the nervous system that it doesn't have to be tight because over here it isn't as tight.
mhm.
So that's the kind of the yin and the yang
Yeah.
of it. So anytime you can do that, or like in Shavasana, one of the things I love to do when I'm in Shavasana is I just, because you've had a lot of activation in your body and just like notice the sensations in your body. Notice your stomach, notice tingling, notice any twinges.
Mm,
And you can even do like a short body scan through that. Notice your feet and your ankles, and you can move up to the head, or I think you move from the feet to the head, right?
yeah.
At least when I do somatic body scans, I do. And, notice that your stomach, are you holding any tension?
Mm,
Can you relax that a little bit more? So
mm,
anytime you can, and anytime you can bring language to it, it's going to hit the soma piece and the
mm.
somatic piece.
Yeah, I can remember one time I had this really interesting conversation with a student after class. She kind of sheepishly called me over and she said, I don't feel muscles in my stomach. So when you are cueing to us, things like draw the belly button in or hug the sides of the waist in, she goes, I don't feel anything there. And
Mm,
she went on to say that she was a victim of trauma. Now, I
yeah,
didn't ask her to share this
yeah,
in our conversation. And as I did just a little bit of one on one work with her, everybody was like collecting their stuff and leaving. she shared that, and she intuitively made the connection
Yeah.
between the two. And it just got me thinking about how many of our students are in our classes and we don't know what their story is. And we can be sharing cues, and there's this disconnection between what we're saying and what they're feeling.
Right. Yeah, completely. And so from a somatic place, so she's disassociated from her body. She needed to feel safe. It's the
Yeah,
only way she was going to feel safe. And I get that.
yeah,
I was very disassociated from my body for probably the first 40 some odd years of my life, maybe
yeah,
40.
yeah.
So, but what I would say from a somatic place, if you or any of your listeners run into that and somebody does come up and talk about that, what I would say is see if they can't feel that muscles or in their body, have them just orient to something outside of
Mm,
like in the room
mhm.
or outside if there's a window. So it could be the candle, it
Yeah,
could be the hanging plant in the class, it could be a block, it could be like if it's a hardwood floor, like the wood grain is making a
yeah,
picture of a person or an animal, have them associate with that
mm,
and over time see if you or they can then slowly move towards, and a good place is kind of starting with the hands and the feet,
mm, mhm, mm,
and again like feeling your feet grounding into the floor, or when you're holding this pose, can you feel your hands pushing into your mat?
right.
Those are all good places to start because yeah, it's a survival mechanism that she
Yeah,
probably had to do,
yeah.
unfortunately.
And in that moment, I sensed an opportunity for her. She saw being in class as an opportunity for her to start to feel those parts of her
Yeah,
body she had, for her own safety, blocked out.
yeah.
Um, So, as we wrap up here, I'd love to just invite you to, if there's any, I know we talked a little bit about a grounding exercise, which I find so amazing for people, but certainly also for yoga teachers who experience stress or anxiety or nervousness when they're teaching their classes. I know when we talked, when I was on your show, we talked a little bit about EFT tapping. Is there anything as sort of a portable wellness technique or something we can do when we're finding ourselves in those moments where there is that sense of, you know, I'm not safe, or I feel my sympathetic nervous system starting to ramp up, something we can do.
Yeah. It's kind of been a theme throughout this, but it's to first be aware of it,
Mhm,
right? Be aware of what you're noticing in your body and move inwards and notice what you're experiencing
mhm,
that's associated with whatever thought you're having, because our autonomic nervous system that controls our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions. It's not our thoughts that cause the restriction, it's our nervous system saying this doesn't feel safe, and so I'm going to react this way, or I'm going to say this, or this is my belief. So the more that we can get in touch, continue to get in touch with our body. And again, yoga is such a beautiful portal, but then really tapping into, and without judgment, I'm noticing I'm having some restriction in my chest right now
mhm,
because I'm nervous about this
whatever. Yeah.
yoga class. I am feeling anxious, or maybe my hands are shaking a little bit more. And can I just can I put them on my lap or, behind me? And can I just notice that? And can
Mhm,
the longer we stay with it, if we can stay with it
mhm,
90, and we have to do it in small, tolerable steps. If it becomes too much, we don't want to stay there because that can overwhelm the nervous system. But if we do it in small doses, it dissipates the energy. And so then it becomes easier. And then it also signals to the nervous system that what you're doing is safe.
Mhm.
And so again, just sensations, 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 and moving in and making friends with them. Oh, I'm noticing I'm feeling a little restricted in my chest again.
Mhm.
You know, is
Yeah,
it more or is it less than last time? Oh, it's a little less. Huh. That's a good thing,
right.
right? So um, so yes, it's just it's continuing to build that relationship
Mm,
with your body. And again, yoga is the portal, but it's moving inward even further. The
yeah.
sensations, the emotions, allowing them to and some of the most incredible releases I've had have been in yoga,
Mm,
right? Because we're slowing down the nervous system.
yeah.
Our healing happens in the pause.
Mm. Yeah, the
We
pause. I
slow
was
down.
thinking that when you were talking, because you first have to pause to notice, and oftentimes we skip the pause and we're into reaction.
Exactly.
Mm,
So,
that's really powerful.
yeah.
To pause and notice. And then I
Yeah.
could see, I liked when you described it as, these, instead of it's like a red alert, what if it's just a message and you could even be saying, thank you, body, for letting me know,
Yeah.
developing a relationship with that part of you that is the sympathetic nervous system, the amygdala response, and just saying, thank you for letting me know. Let me take a moment. Let me take a moment.
Yeah. And let me take a moment and just be with you and allow these feelings and sensations to dissipate because 99.9% of the time they do.
Yeah,
And then it's easier to be more present
right,
for and for your class,
right.
and then you're not going to feel as awkward, and then you'll be able to tap into your intuition, and between your notes and your
Right.
intuition,
You're off to the
then it's
races.
going to flow more naturally, and
Yeah,
people will feel that.
yeah. I love the way you describe that. I think that's a really good takeaway. I mean, most of my listeners are yoga teachers, so I think for them that's a really good takeaway that they can definitely use. I love that whole little nugget we just shared.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us, where to get your book, where to connect with you, and then of course in the show notes I'll have links, but just go ahead, especially for people walking and listening.
Yeah. So you can buy my book on Amazon or wherever, preferably independent bookstores, but if Amazon's your go-to, you can find it wherever books are sold. They'll have to order it. My website is Laurie, Laurie, middle initial E, James.com. And then I have a free beginner's guide to somatic healing that people can download if they would like to start developing that relationship with their body, taking it to the next level that yoga has already taken them to.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I learned a lot, and I hope the listeners, I'm sure they will learn a lot too. Like I said, we had some nice takeaways for yoga
Yeah.
teachers, but also just for human beings. So I love that
Yes.
it has broad applicability. We're all humans with hearts and souls and a nervous system. So everything you shared is really relevant to anybody who's listening. So thank
Yes.
you so much.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciated our conversation.
Yes, just hang on one sec. I'm just going to end and then we'll just chat after. All righty. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.